Hi there, listener, and thanks for joining me for this special flashback episode of the Ski Podcast. There are now over 260 episodes of the Ski Podcast, so this summer I'm publishing some special interviews from our back catalogue to help keep your snow addiction under control until winter comes around again. Today, I'm taking you back to August 2021, when I spoke to Tony McWilliam, founder of one of the world's leading snowsport brands, Faction Skis. We find out what inspired him to start Faction, how he smuggled his first batch of 44 skis across the Swiss border to Verbier, how he met freeski legend Candide Thovex when he was just 16 years old, and how he grew Faction to become one of the most famous ski brands in the world. Sit back and listen to my interview with Tony McWilliam, founder of Faction Skis. Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm well, Ian. How are you? We were just kind of talking about the fact that we hadn't actually seen each other in around about 20 years when when you ran Natives up in, was it Putney? Richmond?
Yeah, it was in Putney. And, you know, we haven't spoken for a long time. And you're right. I seem to recall that you designed the first ever natives.co.uk brochure for us.
I did. And I was thinking about it when you contacted me, because I feel like the early 2000s was just such a fantastic time for British skiing, let alone everything else. And I, being Australian originally, I'd just come over to Europe. I'd just come to London. I'd done a season in Des Alpes and one in Les Arcs, and then came to London, met you through Steph, who was working for you. And it just seemed like everything was going on in London. The dry slope scene, Warren and all his courses, just everything seemed to kind of focus around natives at that time, because you guys were like the center of. Well,
I mean, that's very kind of you to say so. I mean, it was a very dynamic and a very exciting time just then. And in fact, I interviewed Pat Sharples a little while ago, and we were talking about, you know, that really exciting time when British free skiing or free riding was, you know, really starting to develop. And you mentioned, Warren as well. And yeah, you know, it was just such an exciting time, and it's interesting to see how it's developed. And really, Faction Skis kind of rolled with that, I'd say, to a certain degree.
Yeah, a lot of it came out of it because I had so many friends in the English snow sports scene, and one of them in particular, a guy called Phil Martin, who is English but now living in the States, in Tahoe, I think. He was the first person when I found this little factory in just south of Evian who wanted to make skis. And my background was in product design. I've got a product design degree before I moved into graphics. And I contacted Phil, and Phil went, "Oh, this is really cool. I'll email all my friends." And literally within a couple of weeks, I had 50 people go, "Yeah, I'll have a pair of those." And it was all through Phil Martin.
That is so interesting because, as I'm sure you know, Phil and I used to work together, and people used to regularly assume that we were brothers because we both had the same surname, Martin, and we were working for Natives together. But I didn't realise. I knew he had Verbier connections, but I didn't realise he was quite like that. So, what year was it that you actually started Faction itself?
So I'd been living out in Les Arcs, you know, the Republic of Valandry, as they like to call it out there, which was lovely, such a cool little resort. And I think that was kind of 2000, 2001, 2002. I was meeting a lot of guys like Jim Adlington, Gordy Hughes, photographers like Mike Truelove, Ross Woodall, all those guys. Even Americans like Matt Reardon, who seemed to be in the Ellis Brigham catalogue for like 5 years straight, or Snow and Rock, I don't know, can't remember. But so 2003 was when I first kind of put it all together, and the name kind of came to me, and the ski line kind of came to me. And it was I'd already been painting people's skis and snowboards for a couple of years, just for the fun of it. And then this kind of opportunity, there's something just clicked in my head, and I went, well, why don't I make skis? There were no fat skis at the time. The fattest ski was like Solomon Super Mountain, which was about 80 mil wide. And the Solomon 1080 had just come out. The Rossi Pow Air had just come out. Guys like Evan Rapps were coming over to the ski show in London. Was it called Boardex?
Yeah, there was a Boardex thing down in Battersea. They used to have an event there.
Yeah, that was awesome. And you'd get a lot of the freestyle skiers coming out and doing Boardex, the snowboard shoot, which was really great just seeing this kind of the disciplines kind of cross over and everyone just being excited about going out of the mountains and doing things different.
It's interesting you mentioned Jim Adlington, because I also interviewed him for the podcast
Yeah, I saw
not
that.
very long ago. Yeah. And we were talking about, the skis as they came through, and, things were changing, as you say, and there weren't many wide skis at the time. But so you had the name for a start is brilliant. Sometimes these things come to you. People often ask me how I came up with natives, and I don't know, these things sometimes come to you, and the faction really worked well. Very cool sounding apart from anything else, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere if you hadn't been able to make them. So how do you actually, you think, right, okay, you telling me you were painting people's skis, doing bespoke skis or boards, etc., and design is your background. You had some great ideas, but how do you actually go about making a bunch of skis?
Well, the first ones were not quite right. Let's put it that way. But what I was lucky to have a few guys that I met that kind of mentored what I was doing. Peter Bauer, who runs Amplid, I met him really early on, and he was a product designer and a product manager for Burton for many years. And he just kind of opened up everything and talked to me about the process. We went and visited a few factories together and actually used a factory that he ran for a year or two. And he kind of just took me through all that process, and we spent a lot of time talking about side cuts and flexes and shape and things like that.
Where was the factory that he introduced you to where you first got them made?
So the first year was in a little place south of Evian, which is the same factory that started Movement Skis. And then that first year was kind of a bit of a learning experience. And then I met Pete after that, and we moved to a factory in Austria, which I cannot actually remember the name anymore because it was so long ago.
No problem.
We did kind of 2 years there, and then we attended ISPO for the first time. And literally, Pete dropped off the skis at our ISPO booth for the first year, and it was the first year at ISPO. We were really excited, and he went, "Oh, by the way, the factory can't make the skis anymore because we were too small." So that kind of created this process of just a search for factories that could help us out. And skis aren't the most complicated products in the world, but to get them in low volumes and low warranty rates, i.e. to create a product which is just a low volume but consistently well, is difficult.
Yeah, so, I'm sure it is, because the cost must be so much higher if you're doing low runs relatively.
Yeah, and we had no idea. So the first couple of years we were paying twice as much as what we should have been paying, but we had no idea what we were doing, and literally was learning as I went, and I was lucky that my product design background meant that I could understand a lot of the processes. I could go through, I designed everything from the shapes, the flexes, the core profiles, and the graphics. I kind of did everything, and that's just when you start a business, that's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing, though. And you're saying there weren't so many kind of wide skis at the time. In your first ranges, what were they coming in at then?
Our first range was, what was it? It was 80 and then 110. And at the time we were like, oh my God, 110 mil waist. Shit, that's just, no one's going to be able to ski on it. I know. And now you're like, 110, that's every day. But at the time it was nuts. And then kind of a few years later, I tried a pair of K2, I think it was the Hellbent, which was pretty much the first kind of reverse camber fat ski. So over 110, that was about 120. And it was the first time I tried anything with rocker on it. And suddenly we're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And I'd skied with Shane McConkey, for example, a few years before, because I used to do the IFSA freeski comps, which is where I met Phil Martin as well.
Yeah.
And, so it was a really small, this is before the World Tour, before all that stuff. And it was just a really small group of people who used to travel around and sleep on friends' floors and do these comps everywhere. So I met a lot of guys through that as well, and seeing a lot of things that were happening. And Shane was obviously playing around with shapes, and he was going pretty far towards reverse camber, reverse side cut, etc. But my focus had always been on trying to build a ski that, if you're a seasonaire, you could afford, but it was the one ski that you could just do everything on all the time. It was the one ski you needed. It was It was back when we were all sleeping on people's floors and kind of living hand to mouth. And,
So are we talking about what people might describe now as an all-mountain ski, that type of...
Yeah. Now it would be an all-mountain ski.
Yeah.
Back then it was, a fat ski. The early Seth Pistol days. What else was around about that time? Yeah, 110, 120. And then when I kind of started playing with reverse camber and rocker, that was when everything really started to make sense, because I was pretty much the only brand really that liked stiff skis.
Yeah,
I had a lot of friends early on. I'd done a season in Canada early on in my life, so I had a lot of friends in North America as well, and Canadians just love stiff, straight skis. So a lot of the skis I bought out early on were stiff and straight. And when you've got reverse camber, for example, reverse camber is basically the shape a soft ski deforms to so it will float. So if you press a ski with reverse camber, you don't actually need it to flex any further. The only reason you want it to flex any further is to make it a little bit forgiving, so it's not kicking you out the back seat all the time.
It's kind of perhaps harder for a listener now to kind of visualize, what you're talking about, where in that Faction were kind of in the lead of innovation through all of that time with the different elements you're bringing in, whether it's the width of the ski or the rockers or reverse camber, etc. I mean, you mentioned the Seth pistol there. What I seem to remember about those skis where they had great graphics, and that was a key part of all of your ranges. Now, you are a designer. How did you go about actually deciding which graphics to put on the skis? Because that must have been a massive decision.
It was quite easy, actually, because it was my decision. I was like, I want to do this. I'm doing this. I didn't have, a massive sales team to report to. I didn't have a marketing team who ever wanted to kind of give feedback on and everything. And by the time it happened, or by the kind of 2007, 2008, we started getting sales guys on board, and it started growing organically. And at that point, everyone kind of has input. And at that point, you have to fight for the designs you do and where they came from. But early on, I mean, I'd grown up in Melbourne, so there's a lot of street art. London at the time, there was a lot of street art as well. And I used to just kind of go off on travels and go on trips and just get inspired by what was happening around me. And at the time too, like the early 2000s, there wasn't any skis with interesting graphics on, apart from Jamie Strachan doing stuff for Vocal. So the early explosives with the wizards on, all that stuff. He did some amazing art. And again, he was part of that UK scene at the time of people who seemed to be pushing the industry.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie Strachan, you mentioned him in downstairs, in our downstairs loo here. I've got a couple of posters from the Sham Jam from back in the day, and that was his stuff, I think, as well, wasn't it? And it really stands out. Brilliant stuff. Yeah,
he did amazing work. And there was a few other brands kind of got on it as well. Rossi had a whole series of art skis, which were fantastic. And I think, when you're starting a business, it's easy to see everyone out there as competitors, because you're really fighting for, like, I need every sale. God, I need to build this business kind of thing. But my viewpoint was very different. Like Pete, who was starting Amplet, I mean, we did a whole heap of stuff together, and he had his own vision and where he wanted to go. I met a lot of the guys. So Jason Leventhal, Matt Sturbins over at Forefront, the guys who started Armada. Like, we were a really small group of people, and all we were trying to do was take market share from Atomic and Rossignol and Solomon, so we'd go out to these things. Like, you'd go out to the States and you'd do the Freeski magazine tests, or the Ellis Brigham, or the Fall Line magazine tests. And it's the same group of people. We're all traveling together, we're all moving together, and we're all just inspired by what everyone's doing, which I think is quite unique. Like, I don't think in many industries you get a lot of people working who would naturally be seen as competitive, actually working together. I mean, Jim and I, for example, Jim and I worked across next to each other on trade halls for 10 years, both at ISPO and in North America at trade shows over there. So I spoke to Jim a couple of weeks ago, and we've always stayed in touch, because what he's doing with planks is really cool and really complementary to what we're doing, for example.
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes it's easy to kind of think that any industry is really small, but there is a certain feel, I think, within the snow sports industry that makes it work in a different way. When you first did your first range, how many pairs of skis did you do in the first year? How many pairs of skis did you make?
44 pairs of skis. because I picked them up I knew nothing. I just moved to Verbier. I rented a car. I drove over to the factory, which is just across the border in Evian, so south of Lake Geneva. And I picked up the skis, and they were like, right, it's Christmas Eve. You do know that the customs, the border shuts like half an hour ago. What are you going to do? Are you going to declare them? You have to pay tax on them and everything. I'm like, what are you talking about? Tax? Yeah. Import fees? Declarations? What? And so I literally put them in the back of the car, put a blanket over them, and drove across the border, just crossing my fingers the whole way, hoping I would not be stopped. And it was Christmas Eve. It was packed. Like, there were so many cars, they weren't stopping anybody. So they just let us go through. And I'm like, well, thank God for that.
That's very cool. I like that. But 44 pairs, I mean, were they all pre-ordered? Because you mentioned, right, okay, so they all had someone's name attached to them straight away.
Yeah, they all had someone's name attached to them. So I drove them over to Verbier and then started packing them up. And I quite a few people were in Verbier or visiting Verbier, so I managed to kind of deliver them to them there as well. And then, the first few years were just, Verbier was an amazing place. I moved there in 2003, that same year I started Faction, and I knew a couple of people there who I'd met earlier on in doing seasons in Les Deux Alpes, and one or two people from Australia as well. But it's the first resort I'd gone to which just had a massive group of seasonaires and people who lived there from all different communities and cultures and nationalities, who were all just out to go skiing and have fun and work hard and were doing a lot of things together. There was a massive group of all the Kiwi guys, so Sam Smoothie, Tom Dunbar, all those guys came over, Hamish, who went on to start Mons Royal. All these guys were friends of ours through Camilla Stoddart, for example, who's a Scottish photographer, and Beanie Milne-Hume, who we worked together. She did marketing for Faction for many years, but I met her out there as well. And she's a close friend, now married to Xavier Delarue, and just had their second daughter, actually, a couple of days ago, which is fantastic. But it really was this little community of people who came from all over the world, and Verbier was big enough to kind of support it. It was only really Verbier or Chamonix that were big enough resorts to be able to support that kind of community. And it was just great. It was just great.
And that's very, exciting. Obviously, it developed from like 44 pairs in the first year. Interest is growing. Yeah. You sold all of those. It's a great way to seed the market. A bit like when I talked to Jim Adlington about how when he was starting planks, they didn't go full on to start off with. They just seeded the market, giving product to, or letting people get product, in the right hands to start off with. But there must have been a point where the volume, increased, you could therefore bring your costs down, and then you needed to start marketing the skis a little bit more. And, how did that go about? How did you market them? Did you get any sponsored skiers on board? How did that happen to start off with?
It was very organic. I mean, when we started, I was living hand to mouth. I was a graphic designer. I was doing brochures for you. I had a friend of mine who started a magazine. Myself and a lady called Kirsty Swinnerton started Verbier Life in Verbier, which is still running to this day, 14 years later. We were just doing anything we could to kind of make money and survive. I mean, we were ski bums, same as Jim. Excuse me. And so we were kind of selling product. I had a website up. I got interest early on, and this is the days when new schoolers had started as well. So actually it was the first kind of shift towards some form of social media and some form of being able to grow a business online rather than through retailers. Ski Service in Verbier were the first store to stock us and still stock Faction to this day, and they were really supportive. And so that became kind of a hub. And I was lucky enough that one of the athletes who worked for me, rode for me early on, Ben Hawker, a guy called Bungle, who was introduced to me through Warren. He used to come out, crash on our floor, and then the second year he came out and crashed on our floor. Like, one person moved out of one bedroom and left a job as a ski man in Ski Service, and so Bungle kind of took one person's bed and took the other person's job, and now he's running Ski Service.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So we had a small group of, I call them athletes early on, but I mean, we didn't have any money. We couldn't afford to pay athletes or anything. So it wasn't until 2006 when I met my business partner, who was out in Verbier, and he kind of put a little bit of cash in, became a kind of a silent partner, and that's when we started having to go through that process that every business goes through about working out, well, how do you actually run a business and bring cash in and grow it. And most of the marketing was through contacts of people like Phil, guys who went on to write for magazines, whether that was in the US or Europe. And I was pretty lucky also through doing IFSA comps in Europe that I met a lot of the guys in the French ski industry. So the guys who run Like That down in, who do the event in Annecy every year, some of the event guys there. And so it's just kind of contacts and not really knowing what to do when you start a business and how to market it. So, I mean, that's why it took 10 years to kind of get anywhere.
But from that point on, I mean, in the late 2000s, by now we're seeing a proper freestyle, free ride environment, all those other brands you mentioned. I mean, the show notes for this episode are going to be a nightmare because you just mentioned so many names. I'm going to try and put links into all of them. But it's so interesting how the connections, work out. And I think possibly I might be right in saying, but you can tell me that the big jump from being, let's say, a niche kind of brand to being one of the, not a major player like your Rosinells and Salomons that you mentioned just there, but being one of the key medium-sized brands was bringing someone like Candide Thovex on board.
Yeah,
How did that come about?
That was, again, fortuitous. And I like to think that I'm an intelligent person and I've planned all these things, but really it's not. It's a lot of these events are just fortuitous. So that was about 2011. And Candide, I'd first met Candide in Les Arcs when the Quicksilver Invitational was in Les Arcs, and he was only like 16. But he was phenomenal even then. And when we'd started growing Faction, we talked to our sales guys, we talked to our marketing guys, we talked to our athletes, and we were like, look, who do we think, will have an impact, and who do we think would be someone we'd like to work with? And Candide had already had a couple of pro models at that point, and I'd loved the graphics that he'd done he had a Dynastar pro model, which had a little painting of a couple of guys around a campfire, which I thought was really cool. And his agent at the time was a guy called Greg, who was living in London and had just started working for Wasserman, one of the big agencies. And Greg was in charge of basically snow sports and action sports. So he signed Woodsy, signed Candide, and Greg used to work in a ski store in Verbier. So we had mutual friends, and he called me up and he said, "Oh, look, I happen to be just working with Candide now." I was like, "What?" And so it was kind of just a nice, it just kind of everything kind of happened at the right time. Like I called Candide up and we talked, he came around for dinner. And, it's just, Candide's not the person that you kind of feel he is just by looking at the social media that he puts out there and everything. He's actually an incredibly warm, nice guy who just, I mean, you walk down the street in a ski resort in France with him. I walked down the street in Cham with him once, and literally every 5 meters, someone's coming up to him, and it's his old friend or his cousin or someone who owns a store that he's worked with or something like that. And he has time for everyone, and he talks to everyone, and it's phenomenal. It is phenomenal. And so we started working together, and we started looking at the products that we make, and he had a set of criteria that he wanted to achieve through the products. And at the time, we actually started looking back at a ski we made called the Royale, which was the first ski that was 122 underfoot. And he loved the shape, but we wanted to find ways to make it lighter. So we started looking into alternatives for cores, and we used a recycled PET core for a while, which unfortunately wasn't great warranty-wise. And then we swapped over to this mix of bamboo and flax. I won't get technical, but bamboo, no, sorry, not bamboo, balsa. But actually, balsa is technically a hardwood, so it's very strong but very light. And we kind of worked on this together, and Candide gets really heavily involved in every single aspect of the products that he works on. It wasn't just, oh, here's your pro model for this year, just sign your name across the bottom and here we go. It was like, well, this is the third round of revisions we'll do on this product, and I don't like that little red line there. We need to change that and everything.
In some respects, I can see how that could be challenging, but on the other hand, you want someone who really cares about what you're creating and what you're doing there, don't you?
Yeah. And each athlete that we've worked with, worked with guys like Sam Atton, Alex Hall. All these guys have different requirements of what they like. Some are really good at putting that into words and working with someone like an engineer. Others are like, it just feels wrong, and I have no idea why.
And that's more frustrating like that.
Yeah, but it's fine. It's just people, and I've always liked people.
Listener, if you're not too sure who Candide Thovex is, just Google one of those days on YouTube, and you will see some just incredible footage on there. And I wonder, when you look at that and you see him skiing down slopes that are grass or rocks or brick or whatever, you think, oh my God, what's he doing to my skis?
A funny story about that. He was doing one of those days, and he was traveling around. No, sorry, not one of those days. The next one, the Ski the World. Yeah, where he went to China and Mongolia and all these fantastic places. And he was calling us up every couple of weeks going, I need more skis. So we're like rushing, going, how are we going to make like another 5 pairs of skis, ship him out another 5 pairs of skis? We sent him 27 skis for that, 27 pairs of skis for that ski shoot. And in the end, he only used 1 pair the whole time for that whole entire.
Wow, that's amazing.
World thing. Yeah. He came back and was like, well, did you use all those? He's like, no. I'm like, oh, bloody hell.
Oh, the sequence when he skis down the Great Wall of China is amazing. And there's a really good, I was looking at a video when I was doing a bit of research, a kind of, behind the scenes, how they filmed it type of thing. Yeah. And that sort of stuff is amazing. Yeah. So having Candide on board and the other athletes as well, there was a huge growth with Faction. And, it's a multi-million-dollar business now, one of the leading mid-size ski brands in the world. I think it was about 2017 or so. You moved on for the business, gone through, some rounds of funding until then, and you wanted to kind of focus on other things. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. In my notes here, it says you launched helped to launch an eco-friendly outerwear brand, Ghosts.
Yeah. So 2017, we just had our second daughter, and I hadn't seen much of the first one, to be honest. That's kind of the nature of running your own business. And it kind of got to that point where it was like, right, I need to step back a bit. And everything with Faction was kind of heading in the right direction. I'd signed something like 150 different pairs of skis. Sales were up at, we're on like 35,000 pairs of skis a year, and everything was kind of going in the right direction. And I kind of thought that if there was any time that I could actually make a change in my life, this was the kind of time to do it. And we'd started working with outerwear. We'd had our own brand of outerwear for a couple of years, and then we decided to rebrand it as a separate brand, and then that became what's now known as Forward. So that's as a small apparel brand called Forward. And I'd left at the kind of 2017, 2018, and I'd started working with these guys who make fabrics, which are, sorry, this is slightly technical. So when you make fabrics, you weave a fabric and then you dye it. And the dyeing process is really water intense. And there's a process whereby you can embed the color in the yarn itself before you weave it. So you don't have to dye it after you weave. And it's not a very common process. It's called solution dyeing. And I'd found this factory that made solution dyed fabrics. And I personally had kind of wanted to design outerwear that just kind of suited myself rather than the commercial restraints that were happening in terms of Faction, just because of the size that it got to. And so I started this kind of company called Ghosts, and I didn't know what to do and how to get it out there. And a friend of mine said, why don't you do Kickstarter? And I'm like, oh, that looks scary. But I did it anyway. And it was successful. We got to about 60,000 in funding, which was fantastic. We used this fabric, which we launched, which 1 or 2 brands are starting to use, but is still kind of a slow uptake. And then, got an innovation award for Outdoor Retailer, so SIA in the States. And at the same time as that, I'd kind of been headhunted by Nidecker to help them launch what became Eric Pollard's Season. So Eric was another phenomenal athlete.
This is Season Equipment.
Season Equipment, which
brand,
is
right?
skis and snowboards. So Eric Pollard and Austin B. Smith. There are two Austin Smiths. And that was a great process, because it was the first time I'd kind of taken all the things I'd learned from Faction and had someone else's vision and gone, okay, well, how do we build a structure around this? What relationships do you need? How does Eric take all his ideas? And he literally has a garage which is just full of paintings and drawings and sketches and photos and ideas of things like names or words that resonate with him, or colors that he likes. And it was taking that and trying to work out, okay, how do we actually build a product around this and a brand around it? And then what factory do we need? Where are we going to sell it? How are we going to grow it? Like, what should the focus be? What are the important elements that he wanted to get across? And so it was me, a guy called Andy, who was a product manager for Armada for many years. And we kind of put the factory structures in place, got that all kind of running and off the ground. And then that was middle of last year, and that unfortunately kind of put Ghosts on the back burner. And then COVID hit, and literally everything just stopped. Investors who were looking to kind of get involved just kind of went, we're just going to take a year off. And ski resorts going to shut down, and the industry as a whole is really, some people have managed to do well, some people have shifted their focus, and outdoor products, split boards, touring equipment are doing fantastically well, but traditional brands or brands that haven't been able to pivot and adjust to that, in a not questionable time, but times when they would have normally had 10 to 20% growth are now seeing kind of 30% cutbacks.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, COVID has had a massive impact on lots of the snow sports industry, whether it's operational or destinations or equipment, etc. But I think you're right in saying that the touring side of things and outerwear has survived much better. Am I right in saying that you're working with Candide again on his outerwear brand?
Yeah, so we started working on that. I started working on that with Candide at about early 2017. I actually he'd left, just decided to leave Quicksilver and go in his own way, and he needed outfits for Ski the World. So I designed the product that he was wearing in Ski the World, and then I went my own way, and then kind of middle of last year, I guess, we just started to happen to talk again, and he started talking about the project that he'd continued on with, the outerwear, and was just about getting ready to launch. And so I went round there to Annecy and Leclusa and looked through all the product again, and the product was basically the product that I'd kind of designed in my spare time, and he'd kind of just enhanced it and spent 2 years really just refining it and going through every detail and every element there and making it fit him and his vision of what he feels is the type of equipment that he wants to basically empower other skiers to be as creative as he is. That's the kind of the whole idea around the brand. And so we started working in properly earlier this year. And so coming on board to kind of oversee the product development and oversee the team that's currently working on it, or work with the team there, I should probably say, and help refine that product. So the product launched last year. Obviously, that was a difficult time to launch a product. So this will be a really big year for the brand. And then we're just finalizing 22-23 product.
I love those timelines. It's so far ahead. I mean, I know at one point, in the ski industry, you're obviously doing contracting a lot of the time. For tour operators, a long way ahead, but that's a long way ahead to be thinking. And, it's fascinating when you talk about working with Candide there about the creativity side of things. And, you're always busy, whatever it is that you're doing. It's pretty clear. And you're always being creative. You got all these different projects kind of going on. And, I'm sure they'll continue to be very successful, because one thing that has always been very clear is that you're very passionate about your work and you have a very clear idea of what you want to do. And I think those sort of things That's what you need. You need to have that clarity and belief in yourself. And if you have those things, I suspect that's why, you've been very successful with faction and everything else.
Oh, thanks very much, Iain. I think it's a combination of vision and stubbornness.
Yeah, that's
useful to do things when people.
That's useful as well. That's useful as well. Well, I wish you. Thanks very much for your time today, Tony. I really appreciate it, and I wish you all the best for this winter, whichever direction it takes us, and hopefully we'll all find ourselves on the slopes of the lift turning this winter as well.
I really hope so, because at the end of the day, what I've tried to do with my career is make products which hopefully inspire people to go outdoors and get outside. It is, I've been in ski resorts since I was 20, both in Australia, in Canada, in France, in Switzerland, and it's become a kind of a center point of my life, is this ability to just go outside and how good you feel skiing. And if other people can do that as well, then I think I've achieved something. So.
Great. And, as we go into this winter, as well, there'll be a Winter Olympics where I imagine there'll be a whole number of skiers who are on faction skis at the time competing in those different events.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Brilliant to talk to you, Tony. That was really interesting that we finished by mentioning the upcoming Winter Olympics. 4 years later, we have another Olympics coming up, this time in Italy, and you can be sure that plenty of the athletes will be on faction skis. So, if you do see them, you'll now know the inspiring story behind the brand. Thanks for joining us for this special flashback episode of the Ski Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help the podcast, there are 3 things you can do. You can follow us or subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can give us a review on Apple Podcasts or leave a comment on Spotify. Plus, you're always very welcome to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/the Ski Podcast. Look out for our next episode arriving in your podcast feed in a week's time. Until then, thank you for joining us wherever in the world you're listening right now. And until next time, goodbye.